Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Middleism Eschatology or Apologetics, giving an answer for why we believe what we believe in opposition to full preterism, covenant eschatology, realized eschatology, hyper preterism, whatever label you might call your brand of preterism. And that'll be demonstrated. In most of my videos, I've been very reluctant to call an idea, really stupid. I was listening to Dr. Brown this morning, and this is
just talk some basics here. And again, rather than just mock the sheer stupidity of what you heard, I want to help those.
Now, mock the sheer stupidity. He comes right out and says, mocks he doesn't want to mock the sheer stupidity, but he labels what he heard as sheer stupidity. And if you saw the video, yeah, you can go there and look for yourself. But the idea was that there was a preacher, Anderson, that was preaching against the name of Yeshua. That's not Jesus' name. It's not Yahweh or any other of these Hebrew roots names. But he kind of forgets that's the Hebrew name. And then he goes and uses and says, well, Jehovah, that's his name, Jehovah. Well, Jehovah is the English transliteration of Yahweh from the Old Testament. So the sheer stupidity of some people it's amazing. So I bring this in, of course, as I begin on part 3 in dealing with Runyon. And it's just like, I want to say the sheer stupidity, but I don't know if I'm being too mean if I do that. Here's the problem. He's answering my third part, and from my notes and stuff, the nature of his second coming, based out of Daniel 7, that I had talked about in the debate, and the quote from Daniel 7:13, 14, and he tries to give us this mumbo-jumbo non-exegetical, which he claims is exegetical, but I'm going to show you where he completely fails to understand and grasps the full context, because that's just his problem. He doesn't know how to systematically put things together so that you get the big picture. He takes one little piece and rips it apart and thinks he understands it without even knowing the full context of it. So let's start right in on his 14-minute debunking me.
Try to get woke up. I want to look at his third argument from the little video that he put out, specifically to me. And that is that Daniel 7, the vision there, is referring to Christ's ascension.
Now, that's a totally straw man again, totally ripping everything out of context. I quoted Daniel 7, 13, and 14 as being talking about the ascension. I never gave the idea that the whole chapter was about ascension. So, boy, I feel like Gilda Radner on Saturday Night Live. She does her whole spiel, and at the end of it, he corrects her and says, we said this, and she turns around to the camera and says, okay, never mind. It's like, Roy, you got to pay attention to what a person says, and you've got to really listen to what a person says.
Okay, the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. And he argues that this is the ascension in Acts chapter 1. Again, this is another one of those typical objections that nearly everybody raises to avoid the words of Jesus in the Olivet Discourse.
Now, of course it bases on their interpretation. Nobody is talking about avoiding the words of the Olivet. That is simply not true. You have to take the words of the Olivet and you claim that was the second coming. Well, here in Acts 1, he's talking about the second coming. So why aren't you supposed to be able to harmonize the two events together and say, hey, this angel said that Jesus himself would return, and when he would come out of heaven in the same way that he left. That's all it's saying. Well, if that is second coming, why wouldn't I harmonize the two of them together? Why would I use Acts 1 to disprove anything that Olivet says? That, see, is kind of the straw man.
So we're going to look at Daniel 7. So we're going to go there. And as we look at this, and I'm not going to take the time to read all of this, you can do that on your own time. Read it. If you're not familiar with the text, read it, reread it, Go over it again and again till you become very familiar with this chapter. What I want to show you is, we'll just go into this view here. I want to show you that there are two divisions in this chapter. Okay, you have verses 1 through.
Okay, two visions. Let's go to Daniel 7, and I'm gonna point some things out. And this is actually a little bit of a better scope than what he's doing. You see, this is Daniel's vision of the four beasts. He gets his vision. This is language of what he sees about the beast and the fourth beast and all of that. And then all of a sudden there's a switch. Now this is not the vision that was happening before. He comes into something else, and he sees something else. And this is what he's saying that he saw. Well, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took a seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, wheels burning, streams of fire came out before him. Thousands and thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were open. Okay, you've got two different scenes here going on. This might be all, something he saw at the same time, but okay, he got the one vision of the horns, the beast, and all of those things beforehand, and then he looked and he saw a different scene. Okay, so this is different in the sense that it's being broken up. Now, when we look at this, this is where exegesis comes in. Where do we find this similar language at? Ancient Days reigns. Let's go to Revelations 20. Then I saw a great white throne and him seated on it. From his presence, and earth, sky fled away. No place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were open. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged of what was written in the books according to what they had done. So this is, Revelation here is quoting this, and of course, as he says even, this is judgment language. So he's talking about the great white judgment, white throne judgment, of course. So this is a context of that. So he's talking about the fourth beast and all of these things. Then he talks about them, a scene of judgment. And then he goes into another little thing. I looked, then because of the sound of the great words, and the horn was speaking. As I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken in, and their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So I looked, the beast was killed, and body destroyed, and given over to burned with fire. Where does that sound familiar? Let's see something here. Revelation 19. See, I go back one chapter, right? Okay, what does it say? The beast was captured, and with the false prophet, whom the presence had done the signs which deceived those who received the mark of the beast, and those who worship it. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Body destroyed, given over to burned with fire. There's our parallel there. He's referring to the beast then of Revelation, with similarities of what happened in AD 70, which different discussion, of course. But the point was, this is a vision of 19, of the beast and all that, and then of judgment. The judge, the judge is going to be beast. The beast is going to be judged. Let me say this the right way. These are 3, 4 different visions that he is seeing, 4 different things that he's seeing, and nobody's saying that they're in order, correct? Okay. Then I saw, here's another one. I saw the night visions. So there was many of them. So in all these visions, here's another one I saw. Behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and languages serve him. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. All right. Why do we have to go down further for interpretation? I just don't understand that part to begin with. So here's this vision of him seeing the Son of Man, clouds of heaven, coming to the Ancient of Days and being presented before him. So this is a picture of Jesus coming before the Ancient of Days, sitting down at the right hand, and giving the dominion, giving the kingdom, and all. So when did Jesus ascend into heaven? Well, let's do proper um, exegesis, and this is just one part of exegesis. But where are we talking about here? What happened? Where do we confirm what's going on here? We could go to Acts, and I believe it's chapter 3. Okay, but God foretold by the prophets that this Christ would suffer, he thus fulfilled. Repent therefore and turn back your sins, so that the time of refreshing may come from the presence of the Lord, that he may send Christ, appointed for you, Jesus, whom heaven must receive until the time of restoring all things about which God spoke of by the mouth of his prophets long ago. So they all spoke about what? Jesus. And he's saying there that he, what? Has ascended, that heaven has received him, that he is in heaven. I'm looking at one other thing. Far off, everyone who the Lord calls, and with many other words he bore witness and connects, saying, "Save yourself." Okay. Okay. Let's do a word search. Right hand. Let's go back. Let's do sitting at the right hand. Unless I spelled it wrong. Yep, I did. Let's try that back again. Sorry. My fingers are not what they used to be. Alright, let's search. Sitting at the right hand. Okay. Mark 14. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. The Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. Matthew 26:64. 22. Thereafter the Son of Man shall be sitting at the right hand of the power. Therefore, if Christ is risen, seek the things that are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. This is the book of Colossians. Revelation 5:1, I saw the right hand of him who is sitting upon the throne. So we know these in there. And Mark, a young man sitting at the right hand, clothed in a long white robe. That was talking about, what? Entering the tomb. Sitting. I didn't see that one before. And then Romans. And he is sitting in the place of honor at God's right hand, pleading for us. That's where Christ ascended. Then I saw thrones and the people sitting on them, making mark upon their heads, upon their hands, and they were seated on them in the right of judging. So the fact is that Christ is ascended in his resurrection into heaven and sat down at the right hand of the Father and received that kingdom. In other words, he is now judge. He has the right to judge. Where does that come from? Let's pull this piece, another piece into this. John 5. And this is the easiest online resource that everybody could look instead of using one of my own. I use this so people can see. Okay, the authority of the Son. Truly, the Son can do nothing of his own accord but that. For the Father loves the Son, showed him everything in greater works. For as man raises dead, gives him life, so also the Son gives life to whom he will. For the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. So whoever honors his voice, and that will have eternal life. He does come to judgment. He does not come into judgment, but he passes from death to life. So from death to life. A person who's died doesn't suffer the second death. They come to life. In the resurrection. A little bit further, Son is also life in itself, and he has given him authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. See, that's a direct reference back to Daniel 7. Because he is the Son of Man, he's been placed there. He's been, what? Given the dominion. He's in charge of the kingdom, and he has the right to judge. That is all this passage is talking about, that he ascended into it. And when did this happen? Let's put the facts together. He ascended in Acts 1, of course, after his resurrection 40 days later. Now, he sat down and he set judgment. Now, this is according to who? Let's look at that very carefully. I want to go to Matthew 26. And this is easy thing to put together. And the high priest, okay, and all that. And Jesus said to him, "You said so." Okay, so the high priest asked him, "Are you Jesus? Are you this one? Tell us if you are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus said, "You have said so. You have said so correctly." That's basic, the language that's being used there. "You have said correctly. Yes, that's so. But I tell you, from now on, after this point," meaning from these translations, if they could put it in easier English, "but from now on, after this point, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power." That's Daniel 7, right? He will be seated at the right hand of power. He did that after his ascension. And what? And coming on the clouds of heaven. How is he going to come if he's seated at the right hand? It is talking about him sending that judgment. He has the right to send that judgment. So when he's using this phraseology, he's talking about, I ascended, and because I ascended, judgment is going to come. I'm going to be the one, not my Father. I'm going to be the one who sends judgment on Jerusalem. You killed me. Here we sit. You're judging me and you're killing me. But I will ascend to the heavens. I will sit down at the right hand of the Father, and I will send judgment on you because I am the Son of Man. And that's why they rip their clothes. That is just the most basic understanding of that passage. And that's confirmed, but yes, by many scholars. People with much more education, I hate to say it, than Roy Runyon. N.T. Wright argues that extensively. I mean, if I could, do I have it? No, I don't have it. I'm not going to drag through that again, but that's the thing. Now, Daniel goes on, I want the interpretation. And again, okay, so they're going through the, everything that happened with the beasts and all this, and the fourth kingdom, and the 10 kings, and the court, okay. And he shall speak words against the Most High, wear out the saints. That's Revelations 13, where the saints, do I need to go there? Let's look at that real quick. I'm going to go back to Revelations. Let's see if I can find it here. Come on, baby. Would have been easier to go the other way. There it is. All right. I said Revelations 13, didn't I? Okay. Let's go real quick, if that's the one. If I got it. And the beast was given mouth to utter haughty and blasphemous words, and was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months, 3.5 years, and it opened out to blaspheme against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, and all who dwell in heaven. And it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. Authority was given to it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell in the earth. So this wasn't, here's, this, some of the common sense stuff. This wasn't Jerusalem. This was making war on all the saints all over the world. So authority was given over every tribe, people, and all who dwell in the earth will worship it. Everybody. So everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life, who was slain, they are the ones that are me. They'll be taken into captivity goes, and if anyone is slain with sword, the sword must be slain. Here's the call for the endurance of the faith of the saints. So, yeah. Given it for a time and a time and a half, but the court shall sit in judgment. The court shall sit in judgment, and his communion shall be taken away, or his dominion shall be taken away. And this is talking about the beast. His dominion will be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. So the beast is all being destroyed, and the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. 10,000 shall stand before him. They will serve him. I believe, of course, this kingdom that's on the earth is talking about the millennial reign. Different subject for right now. But the idea is that they will serve and obey him. Here's the end of the matter. Why are you trying to go up here in verse 21, and I looked, the horn made war with the saints until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. Wow, until the Ancient of Days. They're talking about, yes, Christ coming down. And what? Until the Ancient of Days came. What does Revelation 19 say? Shall we do this again? If I can get it right. Revelation 19. Okay, where does this war take place? On earth, correct? Okay, so it takes place on earth. So I saw the heavens opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True. So is it literally on a white horse? No, the white represents the purity, of course, but then the other part of that horse means somebody who's a king who's coming to war. So I saw the heavens opened, and he comes down out of heaven. The war takes place on earth. The great beasts of the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the horse and against his army. How are they going to make war against Christ and his army if they're up in the skies flying around? And the battle is against, the beast is against Christ and his army, the saints that come with him. So he comes out of heaven, and the Ancient of Days came out of heaven, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. Another word for that judgment is the idea of revenge. The vengeance was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Now, what happens? The saints took over. The saints rule over the nations. Where do we get that idea from? On his robe, and it's King of Kings. From his mouth came a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. Not some nations, all of the nations. Then where does it say in the next chapter then? And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Those who, I saw that seated on them thrones, seated on them authority to judge was committed. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the word of God, for those who had not worshipped the beast or the image or any of their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. And the rest of the dead, the unjust, did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. Real simple. Do you see, his things that he goes on about trying to say, well, this interpreted, and because the Ancient Days came down, therefore, he came to the Ancient of Days. See, the Ancient Days came down, so therefore he came down. And that just is not exegetically correct. I saw the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, in judgment, there came one like a son of man. He comes like, what? In the clouds of heaven? He came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. So this clouds of heaven is him coming up into the clouds. Son of Man came to the Ancient and was presented before him. That is so simple. He was given the kingdom. When did he sit down at the right hand of the Father? When he ascended. And we saw the scriptures that say he sat down at the right hand and he started to rule. So let's go on a little bit more and see if we can get through this mumbo jumbo he presents here.
14, actually 15. This is the dream, the vision itself, down through verse 14. Verse 15, he says, I was grieved in my spirit. Okay, in verse 16, an angel comes, and now notice this, he made known unto me the interpretation. So from verses 17 through the end of the chapter is the interpretation of the previous verses, okay? So what that means is the elements that we find in the dream must correspond with the interpretation, and the interpretation that's given must correspond with the dream. Okay, so it's the dream is
the interpretation must correspond. Okay, let's look at something. As I looked, horns remained, saints prevailed until the Ancient of Days came. So God comes out of heaven, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. So he comes out. Why do you have to make that say that he came out of heaven when it says he came to the Ancient of Days? The reality is that, yes, he is calling Jesus, God, the Ancient of Days. Not here. He's being called the Son of Man, who came to the Ancient of Days. Because he ascended, he is one now with the Father, united. He is God, the full glory of God. And because of that, when it comes time for the judgment, because they were made war on the saints and prevailed them, it's the Ancient of Days. It is Christ. It is God who comes, and he what? Judges them. He judges them. And judgment was given over the saints of mighty. So found in their favor, the saints, their favor was found by God, and now he comes and delivers them and gets them out, and the saints possess the kingdom. Why is that not the correct interpretation? Why is that not part of it? The court sat in judgment, just above, right? This court sat in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed in the end. And the kingdom of the dominion is given to the saints. The court, here he comes. He defeats. Why? Why? Because he ascended. Because Jesus, the Son of Man, ascended. See, it doesn't talk about the Son of Man down here. It talks about the Son of Man as the Ancient of Days. He becomes the Ancient of Days. I just, wow, okay.
There's 4 beasts that he sees that come up out of the sea. They're all different. So there's a lion, a bear, a leopard. Kingdom are 10 horns. To him, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment for him, thousands were cast down. So this kingdom, the 4th kingdom, are 10 horns. Okay, horns. Okay, and another right here. Okay, the little horn. Now, this is when in the vision that he sees that thrones were cast down. Some versions say.
Okay, some versions. See, he's looking at versions, and he's looking at translations. But here's true exegesis. Okay, it says in my version here, of course, I saw the Navy, and this is English Standard Version. I don't know what he's using, but I could find out in just a second. And thrones were placed. This is from verse 9. Okay, let's look at it. This is called a parallel. It shows you all the different translations. And it says thrones were set in place. Thrones were set in place. Thrones were set in place. I continue to watch. Whoops. Berean study about thrones were set in place until thrones were set up. And then King James, until the thrones were cast down and the Ancient of Days did sit. Thrones were cast down, and the ancient. You can imply that all the thrones of the beast and everything were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did seat. I mean, that would be a fair understanding. But let's go to the Hebrew real quick. I want to point something out. Why did all the other ones do that? Why did that? Obviously, they disagreed with the King James Version. What's the word? They're translating it, war put in place. This is the Nifal. And if I was to explain the Nifal to you, it was something that was being done. It was not something he was doing himself. It was something being done by the other. Perfect, third person, masculine, were put in place. So somebody else did it, put those planes and things. All right, so the word is Rimal. And it means to cast or to throw. Now, how do you get being placed? It's because it's the nifal form of the word. Is that used to be cast into the lion's den? He cast them down. Were cast down. The thrones were cast down. See, King James, the thrones were set up. For as much as thrones were set in the Ancient of Days. See, what the other translators are doing, they're being consistent with the idea that the thrones were being set up based on the form of the word being used to cast or to throw. And that is an Aramaic word that comes from, in other words, not a Hebrew word, to beguile, to cast, to shoot, to be. Yeah, that's interesting. So the idea, of course, is that these thrones were cast down, and the ancient days did sit. The terminology, that is why different translators did it a little bit differently. Those, you could say that the thrones of the others were cast down, or you can say that the throne were set up according to Revelations 20. I saw a great white throne, him was seated, and from his presence and I stood fled, and I saw the dead and great standing before the throne. So that's some of where that idea comes from, but it's not a terrible inconsistency.
They set up, you can check other translations, but anyway, thrones were cast down or set up, and the Ancient of Days did sit, okay? Then this is where he sees a fiery stream come forth from before him, thousands, and that's literally myriads of myriads.
Now, he's still working in the King James. And what does it say in the English, which is obviously a much better translation? His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels burning with fire. And that, of course, is repeated. Some of those things actually come from Isaiah also. He says the same thing about the wheels of burning fire, and if you look that one up. But I'm still failing to see what...
Okay, 10,000s of 10,000s ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. Okay, and that's pretty clear. This is talking about the judgment.
Okay, now you want to hear what he just said. See, this is the first part of the visions. This is the first part of visions. And what did he say? This is judgment. This is pretty clear. So we don't have to go to the interpretation down the rest of the thing to understand a good part of what he's talking about here. He's talking about judgment. So that whole little passage here is talking about judgment. It's not talking about judgment happening and getting ready to happen against what? The beasts and all of those things that have happened. So he's creating, and the idea is there's a judgment that's going to happen against this beast. That's what he's talking about.
And thrones will be set, and the Ancient of Days sit, the thrones are set, cast down, the Ancient of Days sits, the judgment was set, the books were opened. Okay, now, this is when...
Now, notice he doesn't go to Revelations 19 and show you that's where John quoted from. See, that's improper exegesis. You're supposed to be able to understand it's used in the New Testament. Okay, what does that context say? What is this? How is it being applied? How do they all come together? What is this vision all about? And so if it's talking about Revelation, then you have to harmonize. You have to understand the context.
That the great words were spoken by the little horn, and the Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven, and the Ancient of Days, he came too. Now that's
Now, the first part though, he skips that, right? I saw in the night vision. See, this is a different vision. This is 4 visions, not just one vision and an interpretation. There are 4 of them because he's not paying attention. I saw in the night visions. I saw another part of the vision. It's pictures. I mean, all the way through Revelation, he's getting pictures. The 7 vials, the 7 trumpets. They're always pictures of events and things that are going on, and there's overlapping, and there's cross-contamination, you could say. I'm joking. But the 2 of them, you know, wow, it's not a chronological order or anything else. Let's hear what else he goes on to say.
one of the things where they really hone in on right here. They say this has to be that he was going up if he comes to the Ancient of Days, okay? But I'm not even going to waste time on that right now.
He won't waste time on it because that's the whole central part of it. See, I won't waste time on it. He won't explain it. He won't deal with it. He came to the Ancient of Days. If later on it says the Ancient of Days came, then who is he talking about, Jesus or God? Because here the Son of Man comes to the Ancient of Days. And see, to rip that out of context like that and overlook it, that's the tragedy. This is the unscholarship I'm talking about from Roy Runyon and others like him. They don't pay attention to that, and they want to ignore it. They want to pass over it. And here's the clear example. You heard it from his own voice. I'm not even going to deal with it right now.
Because we're going to show you some other things to look at. The Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven, and this is why that I say this is what Jesus is quoting in the Olivet Discourse. And here it is.
Okay, and here's the thing. He's saying I say that. But I've already, in the debate and everything else, in the other discussions I had, I showed every time you see that phrase, the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, he's quoting from Daniel 7:13. Matthew 26, you will see me, the Son of Man, coming on the clouds of heaven. He's quoting from there. There are some standing here who will not die, and they will see the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. He's quoting from there. Every time you see that phrase, Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, he is quoting from Daniel 7:13, and he's applying it to himself, and he's talking about judgment. Remember, that is the context. The war and the beast and of all that, judgment. The books were open, judgment. He is dealing with the idea and the idea of judgment. Coming with the clouds of heaven, judgment. I mean, Don Preston has written that book. Coming on clouds. It's all about the idea of arguing from the parousia that Matthew is talking about here in the Olivet is about, like in the Old Testament times, when an army comes and God himself comes in the form of a cloud or something like that and executes judgment. But we saw that the Son of Man is given the right to judge. He is the one who has the right to judge, and he sends that judgment. It's not coming from the Ancient of Days, it's coming from the Son of Man. So why does it say Ancient of Days? Because he first comes to God, and he's exalted at the right hand. He is God, and it is as if God comes. He, the Son of Man, is the one no longer actually being called the Son of Man. He's being called the Ancient of Days now. He is the one who comes. But there's a concept. But is he still the Son of Man at his second coming? What does it say in Revelations 19? Which he is called the Word of God. Goes back to John, doesn't it? But he is the Son of Man who comes on clouds.
As you can see it with your own eyes. The Son of Man coming.
So he's not saying anything different than I have said. That's exactly what I said and I presented. It's not about the whole chapter. He's only quoting that part of it. Why? Why is Jesus only quoting that one? Because he will come with power and great glory. He's talking about his parousia when he comes in judgment on those people in that generation.
With the clouds of heaven, Jesus said, the Son of Man coming in. The only difference is with versus in. Okay? There's no difference.
There's no difference. There slightly is, but the idea is, if anybody really paid attention to it, the majority of things that were quoted in the New Testament came from the Septuagint, which is the Greek text. They would have, most common thing that Paul even used was quoting from the Septuagint, from the Greek Septuagint. And the reason being, it was easier to copy and make copies of the Septuagint in Greek than it was Hebrew text. Scribes just didn't make Hebrew text all over the place. And they were set up in the synagogues. You did not have access to a Old Testament copy in Hebrew because they were kept in the synagogues. But the Septuagint is what put the book of the Bible available for the common man in Greek. And I don't think he understands that background of that one.
The Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. This is why I say and insist that Jesus quotes Daniel 7:13 verbatim in the Olivet Discourse. Okay, now just hang on to that. Now, notice that in the dream, that this culminates, the Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven, the Ancient of Days, and came to the Ancient of Days. They brought him near before him, and there was given him, the Son of Man, dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So, the vision culminates with the reception of the everlasting kingdom. Now, he's going to give the interpretation. And again, the great beasts are four kings, which, as I pointed out, the fourth beast, and that's what Daniel wanted to know about. He wanted to know specifically.
Okay, get that. That's the culmination. He's saying that's the culmination, so he's trying to put that in order. That's the culmination. But we already showed you that in that passage there about him ascending, because he sends judgment on the beast. The idea is that thrones are set up in heaven. The, the beast is judged. He's thrown into the lake of fire, but then all the peoples and tribes and nations are also judged later on. So there's two judgment that goes on in Revelation 20, right? And where the people are killed for what they do wrong on earth, and then the verse is them standing before God and being judged.
About this fourth kingdom and the horns, the 10 horns, and the little horn. And this, you have to deal with this right here. And you're prevailed against them until. Do you see that right there?
Until the Ancient of Days. Now, I just explained all of that, didn't I? That because he ascended, he is now being called the Ancient of Days. How can he come if he was not in heaven? How did he get into heaven? Well, heaven received him until what? The restoration of all things, until those things happen. And with it comes judgment. How do you restore without having judgment? You get rid of the evil stuff. So here he is talking about him being in heaven first, and now until the Ancient of Days came.
Look at that right there, brethren. Look at that right there, Stephen Whitsitt, because you have to deal with this right here. And your listeners, your readers, they're going to press you for an answer to my question on this right here. The little horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came.
Okay. Should I do this again so that it's absolutely clear? I'm going to do this. This is absolutely funny. When Roy looks at this, I don't know if he'll grasp it. Right there. And it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, right? And authority was given over to every tribe, people, and laughed, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship those names who have not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life was slain. Did not I just say, the books were opened, the books, their names written in the books? Do you see the parallel that he's bringing here? The foundation of the world and all that. So here's a call for the endurance of the saints. They're going to be taken captive. They're going to be slain with a sword, and all that's going to happen, right? Okay. And then what does it go on to? The second beast is talking about the second beast. Isn't that funny? And what does the second beast do? I mean, they're making war on the saints and everything else until what happens? Until what happens? What's going to happen? Then the marriage supper of the Lamb. That is all talk about the Revelation, the rapture. In heaven crying out, a great multitude in heaven crying hallelujah. Salvation, glory, and power belong to God, for his judgments are true and just, for he has judged the great prostitute who corrupt the earth and avenged her the blood of the servants. God, who is seated on the throne, fell down and worshiped God, who was seated on the throne, saying amen, hallelujah. And from the throne came a voice saying, praise our God, and all that. So here's, again, the picture. So until the Ancient of Days comes, well, here he is. He's in heaven. Praise our God, your servants, and all that. For the Lord our God, the mighty reigns. Let us rejoice. For the marriage lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with pure light, bright. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. I'm your fellow servant and all that. Okay, so now, what's the next scene? Heavens open up, a white horse comes down. They describe his clothes dripped in blood. And then what does it say next here? The word of God, and the armies of heaven arrayed in fine linen, white and pure. Same language as above. These are the saints. Were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, and he what? Strikes down the nations. There's your revenge. Kills the beast. Throws them in and all that, right? And he will rule them with a rod of iron. So he starts to rule over nations. There's Daniel 7, right? Then I saw the angels standing over the sun come together, the flesh and the mighty, all of them killed. And I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth with their armies. Now this is a reiteration a little bit, right? With their armies gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the horse and his army that came out of heaven. And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, the beasts, the mark, who did all those things. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. How much more clear can it be? It blows my mind. You can't get any clearer than that. I saw in the night vision the Son of Man. When did the Son of Man then ascend into heaven? 33, when he ascended in Acts 1, that's when he ascended. See, he wants to argue that with the saints prevailed until the Ancient of Days came. Until the saints prevailed until the Ancient of Days came. So he's saying the Ancient of Days came. So this is supposed to be, there came, like one of the, and the Ancient of Days came. He's trying to say that's the interpretation. He came to the Ancient of Days. Now he's saying this is supposed to be the interpretation of it. And I've just debunked all of that. It's ludicrous.
And judgment was given to the saints, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Again, this is the interpretation of the dream, the vision, which culminates.
Again, and the saints shall possess the kingdom, and the saints will rule with them. I showed you that in 19 and 20, that there's your fulfillment, right? There's the parallel passage. But does he ever go to Revelations and deal with any of that? No. Why? Because he does not understand how that's supposed to happen, or why that's supposed to happen.
In the reception of the everlasting kingdom. Do you see that? And the kingdom was established in the first century. Okay? I don't think we have any disagreement on that point. But this is what you...
Okay, he said it was established in... Do you see the double talk? This kingdom was established in the first century. Why? Because Jesus ascended into heaven and sat down. He just said it. Wow. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under heaven happened in the first century. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm saying. When he ascended into the right hand of the Father. He sat down. He received the kingdom. He now is judge over it. And then now during this time of the beast and everything else, the beast does all that he does, tribulation, does what he does to the saints, makes wars on them until the Ancient of Days comes. And what does he do? He destroys them and gives the kingdom and the dominion back over to the saints.
Must see, and that is that the little horn made war with the saints right here, prevailed against them, and this happened for 3.5 years. See that? He shall wear out the saints.
Do I need to bring it up again? Do I have to do this again? I mean, I want to hone in on him. I'm hoping he will actually listen and pay attention to this and see this. So far, I don't know if he's looked at the other two videos and worked his way through it. And it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given over every tribe, people, language, and all who dwell on the earth will worship the beast. Everyone whose name has not been written in the foundation of the world of the book will be lamb who is slain. If anyone here, let him hear. There you go. You go back to Daniel. I'm laughing, people. I really am laughing.
Of the Most High. Do you see that? And this takes place for a time.
Okay, for time and a half. Wow. The rest is... where does it say that? Oh, oops, wrong one. Go to here. Yeah, Revelations. And the beast was given a mouth uttering hot and blasphemous things, and it was allowed to exercise 42 months. What's 42 months? 3.5 years.
And the dividing of time. That's 3.5 years. I think everybody agrees on that. Nearly everybody will agree on that this length of time is 3.5 years. So, what this means is that if the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days is the ascension, then...
You notice you missed that word. I want want you to look at it and listen to it again. He said what?
The Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days is the ascension.
He ignored that. Why?
Then,
Because it doesn't work for his.
since the little horn makes war with the saints and prevails against them for 3.5 years and wears out the saints for 3.5 years until the Ancient of Days came.
Yeah, I want you to notice something else. Look at what he's doing here. And the horn and all that. This is the interpretation. Behold, the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against until the Ancient of Days came. So right there. But then he skips down and says, until a time and a half and all of that. Do you see that's not in logical order? The great words against the Most High and shall wear out the saints, the Most High, and think to change the times and law. And the same horn made war and prevailed against them. There's, it doesn't follow in some kind of chronological order. There's a repeating that goes on in there. So he has to go from here and then back up to here because he recognizes that there's not a chronological order in the discussion of how this thing is being brought out. He has to go back there. See the time in 3.5 years? Okay. Then at the end, given into his hand until a time and a half, until the dividing of time, until that 3.5 years is over, is when the Ancient of Days comes.
Then that means that this 3.5 year war against the saints by the little horn had to be occurring all during Jesus's ministry.
No. Where does he get that idea? Because remember at the beginning, what did it say? Acts until he came. I don't understand. Is he talking about, I'm trying to figure out what he's accusing me of saying. Because is he talking about him coming the first time at the beginning of the reign? That's the coming. He came as the Ancient of Days, and that was his coming. And then, so the war takes place until he. See, this statement here is just beyond comprehension of why he would sit there and say this. Let's listen to it again for just 1 second.
Came, then that means that this 3.5 year war against the saints by the little horn had to be occurring all during Jesus's ministry.
And it just baffles my mind how he could say that, how he could derive that from that scriptures or from anything that I said. And this is the wow. What did Michael Brown say? What was it? What did he say? Let's go back over here one more time. What is this? What does he say?
Of what you heard, I want to help those who genuinely wonder or who are.
Oh crap! I accidentally hit the one. Let's go back. Go back. I want to. My mistake. But you heard the thing. You heard it. He said this is utterly stupidity. Utter stupidity. That's my other thing I'm dealing with. Utter stupidity. Let's go on.
Now, I want the evidence for that. And Stephen, your listeners and your readers, they want the evidence for that. Now you would think, if this were true, that the little horn made war with the saints, prevailed against them until.
Throw something else in here. Here's another thing that's kind of goofy. It's because Alan Barter and Don Preston both claim that he ascended in 70 AD. That's when he ascended onto his throne, was given the kingdom and all that. In other words, he didn't rule and reign before those 3.5 years, or the time between the 40 years. He wasn't ruling and reigning. They say he had a kingdom, but he hadn't gone into heaven until he crossed the second, entered the second veil, and that happened, and came out at the second coming. I mean, it is such a mess of ideas and things. And I don't know if he's trying to shove that in there or not into this, because there's just there's no way that Christ ascended in 70 AD. But because he ascended in AD, the time of the trouble and all that even would be consistent with preterist hermeneutics if he came in AD 70, the 3.5 where he ascended, and because the Son of Man ascended, he sits at the right hand of the Father, he sends judgment, the judgment comes in 70 AD. That's all part and parcel of the same thing that the Olivet is about. But that's not about his second coming. I hate to tell you this. So yeah, all of this here, because he sent it, this is all Revelation. Revelation is all future. So this has nothing to do with AD 70. None of these beasts and all this has anything to do with 70 AD. But shh, don't tell tell the preterists that.
The Ancient of Days came, and that is the ascension, then you would think, if that is true, there'd be some shades of this from the very beginning of the church. Your own words, Stephen. Show us the evidence of this 3.5-year war waged by the little horn against the saints.
And I never said that. So this is where I go, Gilda, wrong topic, baby. You just created a straw man of something that I never said, and you can go back to my videos. Maybe I should have done that. Go back to it and showed you that I never said that.
For 3.5 years that happened until the ascension. Now, that's your argument, so you need to deal with it, okay? Now, I want us to look at a couple of other things here that if we consider Stephen's opinion here, that this is talking about the ascension.
And I'm not the only one with that opinion, meaning in scholarship, I come to an idea of understanding of what it, and then I go to talk to experts, people who are much smarter than me, and I go, hey, does this sound right? This is my understanding. They go, yeah. I go to another, yeah, that's right. Hey, we're all in agreement, aren't we? Yes, we believe the same thing. We understand the same thing. We understand basically the same thing. We come to understanding. Wow, that's wonderful. It was never me going to them and teach me and tell me what I need to believe. It was me, this is what I believe. Does that sound right? Which is far different cry of what preterists understand.
Then I want you to look, let's look at 2 Thessalonians. I wanted to go to, again, back to Matthew 24, rather, again, as we look at Jesus quoting from Daniel 7, and Jesus posits the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory in this generation. Do you see that? This generation.
Yes, coming in judgment. That whole chapter 7 is about judgment that comes, doesn't it? All about judgment. That second coming. What he's thinking of doing is this, since 7, like you said, Revelation, Daniel 7 is all about the beast and the things that have happened with Nero and, the 3.5 years and AD 7 destruction. Therefore, the second coming, it's all talking about the second coming, and therefore it shows all Revelations being fulfilled, and you put the two together and all things are fulfilled according to those passages and everything else. The problem is that AD 70 and the book of Revelations are two different and distinct. See, all these preterists are adapted at Matthew 24, but when it comes to harmonizing Revelations to the events of AD 70, they don't work one iota. That's why he never went to Revelations whatsoever and showed the parallels in this about Revelations 20 of the seats and being placed and the judgment, and the books being opened, or the beast being thrown into the lake of fire and being judged, or Satan himself being thrown into the lake of fire, and all that, those passages there. He doesn't deal that, and he won't, because they don't jive together.
Shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Now remember, Stephen admits that the Olivet Discourse was fulfilled in AD 70. Okay? He admits that. He admitted.
And I've repeated over and over ago, the Son of Man coming on clouds of heaven with power and great glory has nothing to do with his second coming, but has everything to do with the coming of judgment. And as he's gone through Daniel 7, you see all of that is about judgment. And that's the parallel. That's the point. But Revelation, though, would not be about AD 70. That's the big problem. But the thing is that the idea of it coming together is because he ascended, he sends judgment. Because he is in heaven, he sends judgment. Now, the judgment, here's another thing, makes war on the saints, makes war on the saints, makes war on the saints. And so, who made war on the saints? Romans did. These other nations. These king and this beast is not the Jews themselves. There's so many inconsistencies in trying to make it fit. It blows the mind. Maybe that's the next.
That last night on John Watson's program. Okay. Now, tell us show us how that the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven is the ascension when Jesus placed it and posited.
Because he ascended, because the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, because he ascended, he now sends judgment. This generation shall not pass till all these. Because the Christ, the Son of Man, ascended in 33 after his resurrection, he sent the judgment. That is what he's talking about. Because the Son of Man, it will come in the clouds of heaven. He will come in judgment in 70 AD. That is the whole context. I've repeated that I don't know how many times. One ear and out the other. That's what it's all about. This coming is a coming of judgment, not of Christ himself, where he stands in the Mount of Olives.
Did in the generation, the first century generation, which you admit was fulfilled in AD 70. Now you've got a huge problem here. You have a huge contradiction.
No, I don't. You have a huge lack of understanding of what I said and what scriptures actually talk about. Because the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory is not the second coming. It is talking about the judgment to come. How many times?
In this. And lose my patience with these slick-tongued con artists. And lose my patience with these slick-tongued con artists who practice. Just sometimes I just get so frustrated with and lose my patience with these slick-tongued con artists who practice the black arts of deception and sleight of tongue, who expect their listeners to be just complete idiots and gullible enough to swallow down anything they spit out, while they themselves couldn't recognize an exegesis if it slapped them in the face. Now, I want you, the listeners of this video.
You heard all of that. I mean, how many times do I need to repeat it? I showed you exegesis. I showed you partial exegesis, and I showed you how Revelations, how it correlates with Revelations 19. He never did that. He never put the things together. He never actually looked at the words. He skipped over came to, never dealt with that word. That's not exegesis when you pass over something. I mean, if I was to go back to that word came to, let's see. That's maybe something I should do to blow up everything he said. Came. Let's go look at the Hebrew on that. Exegesis, people. We look at the Hebrew. We don't look at the English. We look at what the Hebrew meaning of that word is. Okay. This is called an interlinear. This is a direct translation. Wow, here it is. I was watching in visions the night, and behold, with clouds of heaven, the one like Son of Man came. The word came. Strong's Hebrews, came. Atah. It's a cal perfect. The binyan is the cal. All right. To come. Where's it used? Ezra 4:20. To us are come unto Jerusalem. And their colleagues came to them. And the proverbs to come to bring or brought. And come to bring. They brought the golden. Interesting, huh? Brought, because of course in the different binyans, the way it's used, the word will have several subtle meanings, and this again is an Aramaic word. Judah was brought, and they have brought. Was brought, and they brought. And they brought. Was coming, came, was coming. See, that would be a different type of form of the word, right? They came. The word is used 16 times, and every time it says came. And what was this last one? 7:13. The Son of Man was coming. The man came, was coming, kept to. 7:22. And of the days came, and judgment of the days came. So one was coming, came, coming up to the ancient days, and the other one is came, as much as came the ancient of days. So it was the ancient of days who came. There's your exegesis. That's basic, just basic type of understanding.
Go. And I want you to invite your friends to watch. Just sometimes I just get so frustrated with and lose my patience with these slick-tongued con artists who practice the black arts of deception and sleight of tongue, who expect their listeners to be just complete idiots.
Yeah, I'm a con artist. I've been doing this for 40-some years. I've been a pastor, youth pastor for 40 years, but I'm practicing the black arts and whatever else you said. I mean, that's called character assassination.
And gullible enough to swallow down anything they spit out, while they themselves couldn't recognize an exegesis if it slapped them in the face. Now,
exegesis that slapped him in his face. He can't even read my own words, let alone do
I want you, the listeners of this video, and in AD 70, why did Jesus quote that? Cause it to fulfillment in AD 70 if the Son of Man coming in clouds of heaven was the ascension. Okay? And the
okay, enough of all of that. Now close this up because I've gotten a little bit longer than I want to. The whole point is this here, people. You give somebody a glass of water and you show them the glass is half filled up with water, and they look at it and go, no, it's half empty. They will argue their heart out it's half empty, but the truth is it's also half full. No, it can't be half full because it's half empty. People will do that. And until you see both sides, you're not going to understand. Until predators understand and see the other side and the perspective and how the pieces fall together, they will never understand. They only see it one way. They only see AD 70. They see that. They don't really look at the scriptures and pay attention, ignore them. He says, we do Acts 1. Jesus was lifted up and was received by the cloud. Received. This is receiving. This is covering over. Receiving. He lifted up and the cloud received him. It was not the cloud coming down and taking them up. They were lifted up and the cloud received. That's basic English. And this is where they trash everything and then tell us how terrible we are. All right, I've gone on enough on this debunking part 3. So you guys have a good day. You're there to judge. You can look at it and tell. Thank you guys for putting up with us for so long. Sorry it is too long, but I thought this was important to really show in detail. So I'll catch you guys on the flip side.